final version.
Okay. That's very interesting.
But there's just interesting things on it. Quarries, sandpits, pipes, killings, a bleach green I saw down around Athlone, all coloured in beautiful. And lots of, and then when I went to do the final version, they omitted a lot of this detail. For example, public houses, heaps of public houses are put down in them, you know.
Is that right?
You know, so the place is full of them. It was just coming into the kind of decline era after Father Matthew. And
yeah.
He put the kibosh on him. But there was Mullingar said there was about 50 public houses. And then, of course, a lot of them are unlicensed, selling strong liquor. But that's the way things were, you know. Shebeens and all that. But they were put down wells, pipes, quarries, sandpits, killings, bleach greens.
And what is a bleach green?
A bleach green is where they put out the flax.
Oh, right, okay.
Dry, and it's part of the process of flax. It's put into water, like Seamus Heaney's a famous poem about it, into water for it. There's a whole process, you know, soaking in water, then bleaching, scutching. There was a whole, and there was a big industry in Ireland until mechanization destroyed everything. You know, it was a big money spinner for the cottiers and labourers. You know,
okay.
And its decline really wrecked the economy here. You know, that was after the Act of Union. Of course, you had free trade, and all the small industries here were wiped aside. But the remnants of them, they were it was all that time, 1830s, 40s. But it captured it. The fair plan maps captured all that.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. Yeah, I'll definitely take a look.
But you'd have to have a look at the Hill of Uisneach. You'd be interested. Now, I didn't look at it in detail. You'd see all the bits that may not be on the official map.
Yeah.
And to say the colour is in it as well. The colour of the houses and so forth is lovely. It's just it's a work of art.
That's interesting.
The only thing about it, Angus, no way on your present condition. I found it hard. You get the big map. It's massive. And it's on a desk, and you have to lean over it. You get me? And you can't put your hands on it.
Yeah.
So if you're anyway unsteady, it's not on. They should have it up in 45 degrees that you could see it, you know, but they don't.
Are people getting into the?
Oh yeah, you have 11. Everything is okay. We have a quota.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and it'll increase as time. What time is it now? 58. 2 minutes. They'll keep coming in.
And Seamus, are you getting any emails from people who can't get in?
I've checked now. Nothing coming in. I'm going to check again. No. I have the phone here beside me looking for emails. I have everything in order. So if anybody's looking for me, I'll be able to respond. How are you, Ed?
Good evening.
How are you, everybody? Good.
Hi, everyone.
We're just waiting now for people just to come in on the exact time. And in fact, we'll start at just around 8. And Angus is ready here. And we just introduce him. And then when we get moving, we'll ask people to turn off the audio and the video. The audio, so as nobody is talking inappropriately during the lecture. And the video, if we turn that off, it gives better reception to everybody. And Angus, how long does it last, Angus, about?
I don't know.
Okay,
I'm afraid.
no problem.
I've got 48 slides to get through. Am I still there in the picture? I seem to have.
You are. Oh no, you're perfect. You're still in the two pictures.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah. I'll just give another few minutes now, just that people get in, because some people, we just give it a little bit of. Don't change that, Angus. There's thing coming up on the bottom of that now. Search all the icons are coming up. Did you touch something there?
Am I still there or no?
You are. No. Did you touch something there? No.
I did. Yeah, I did.
Don't. Tabs came up there. Sorry, we don't want to see them. It's perfect now.
Okay, good.
And we'll just give people just a few minutes grace, because I myself tonight had to install an upgraded version to get on. So some people might be in the same position. Can you hear me there, Angus?
Yeah, Yeah, can you hear me, Seamus?
Yeah, I had to install. So some people might be in that position. It might take them a few minutes just to, if you haven't been using Zoom for a couple of months, you have to upgrade every time. Hi, Fergus. Yeah.
Hey, Seamus, how's it going?
How are you keeping? You well? How are you keeping?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Good. We start in a few minutes. We're just waiting. Some people had to upgrade, install some software to get on Zoom. So it's just taking a few minutes for some people to get going. We'll be going approximately. And we questions at the end, and Angus will last about, I'd say, about 60 minutes.
It's whether the question is whether you'll last for 60 minutes.
We're a resilient race, Angus.
No, oh God, there's no doubt.
Yeah, we put up with storm, with thunder, with fire and brimstone.
Well, there's plenty of that in this talk, I tell you.
You have 17, Angus. You're in superstar mode now.
I hope
I just check the phone here if they're burning down the gravel. No. Yeah.
Betty, I love the magnifying glass.
Oh, how are you doing, Pauline? You well?
Hi, Seamus.
How are things?
I'm just saying to Betty, I love her magnifying glass. It looks wonderful. Your number.
How are you keeping?
Great. It's lovely to be back. It's really nice to have
Were you in cold water swimming all summer?
Yeah.
You look invigorated.
Oh,
good.
Lovely. It's great. I love it.
Yeah. That's marvelous. And we'll keep you informed. There's a few in Moat as well, Moat, and I'm doing talk in Moat in October.
Okay.
And so we have. I sent you the program. Did you get it?
No.
Oh, sorry.
Oh God, I was so sorry to miss the August trip.
Oh, it was incredible. Not messing.
It looked wonderful, and I bloody well got COVID for the first time.
What did you?
Me going out.
You all right?
Yeah, I just got COVID for the first time.
I know.
Go anywhere, but I was really disappointed to miss that, because I would especially have liked to have gone along with the group and everything.
Yeah. Oh no, it was a great day. We'll be doing it again next year.
Oh, good.
Yeah, to be on next year. Don't worry.
Yeah, because I was wondering, because could you go there onto that land yourself?
No,
it's private.
Animals on it.
Okay.
No, but there will be other ones. No problem. You can't go on yourself. No, it's kind of difficult to access. It's a difficult hill to find stuff on.
Yeah, I had your book. You see, I'd looked and I was wondering about going.
Yeah.
So the trip came up. It was a great idea.
Yeah.
But you had a good turnout.
It was incredible. 60 or 80. It was, and we got Roisin Gaffney down. She sang, you know. It was fabulous. Oh, it was just.
How did you manage all the numbers?
Well, it was just with a good few there, helping out,
Yeah.
It's about 4 or 5 of us kind of corralling, and so it was great. I was just great.
God, that shows you the enthusiasm and interest.
Yeah. Well, good evening, everybody. You're very welcome to our first lecture of the season, and we welcome Angus Mitchell, who's going to talk about the Hill of Uisneach. Angus is a historian. He's lived in Ireland for 20 years. He's published extensively in the War of Independence. His work is focused on the contribution of Protestant dissenters to shaping of the Irish Revolution. he was awarded a Royal Irish Academy bursary to carry out research into the Hill of Uisneach between 1898 and 1928. And that's the period he'll be looking at tonight. And he's published in History Ireland on this topic, and he's also will be contributing to our forthcoming ERV. So we'd ask people, if you wouldn't mind, and I'll do it now as well, if you turn off your audio just for the duration of the lecture. That's important because we don't want to hear any sounds that we wouldn't like to hear during the lecture. And I would ask you as well, please turn off the video because it gives better reception to everybody. Angus is very welcome, and we will have an opportunity at the end for questions. So you're very welcome, Angus. Thank you.
Seamus, thank you very much indeed, and good evening, everyone. And I must begin with an apology that my intention was to travel this evening to Mullingar to give this talk in person, but I was coming down Mullockmore at the beginning of August, and suddenly my knee gave way, and things haven't improved. So I'm really sort of quite incapacitated in terms of any significant movement, and so that is why this evening's talk is online, and I really appreciate you coming along. Okay, so you can see the title there. What I'm intending to do is to talk about the Gaelic League's interaction with the Hill of Uisneach in the early 20th century. I think I might just quickly give you some sense of the context as to how I found my way to the Hill of Uisneach. I spent a great deal of my research time as a historian working on, as Seamus said, these slightly alienated and ostracized figures who were involved in the Irish Revolution. Most importantly, I suppose, Roger Casement, who I do briefly mention in the talk this evening. But in the last decade, my interest has really focused on Alice Stopford Green. And it was when I was going through Alice Stopford Green's papers in the National Library of Ireland, this was about 10 years ago, I came to these fragments of press cuttings that essentially associated her with the Hill of Uisneach. And then I didn't really make too much of them until I began to realize her own quite significant engagement with County Meath and Westmeath, the Kingdom of Meath as such. And then I began to dig, and I was put in touch with Ruth Illingworth, and I started a correspondence with Ruth, who seems to know everything that I was discovering. And she was incredibly helpful in my own research. And I then began to realize that actually the Hill of Uisneach had played a very significant part within Gaelic League thinking. And so that's really how I came to the Hill of Uisneach. And then in the last year or so, 18 months, I've traveled up there, and I had a really enjoyable time at the big fire festival in May of this year. I suppose to begin on a slightly theoretical note, it's not going to be theoretical this evening, but I just want to get us to start thinking in a way about the kind of, the deeper historical and temporal context for what I'm going to say. There's a lovely essay by Seamus Heaney called The Sense of Place. And in it, he makes reference to John Montague's poem, A Lost Tradition. And this idea that Montague essentially speaks out at some length in that poem about the idea that the landscape is a manuscript that we've lost the skill to read. And I think in many ways that is at the center of what I really want to talk about this evening. It's to really look at how the landscape of Uisneach was in different ways being interpreted and retrieved and indeed reclaimed by the Gaelic League and particular intellectuals involved in the in that movement in the early 20th century. So in that sense, I want us to think about this idea that in a way space and time were part of that process of sovereign rediscovery. That really at the heart of a lot of Gaelic League thinking was the realization that there was a need to actually kind of recalibrate and realign the language movement with Irish space and time. And I think that idea will become clearer as I speak this evening. And then also this obvious idea, which actually links in with what Montague is saying there, this idea that landscape is a relic of lost culture. And that, you know, I'll talk more about that as the translations of early Irish literature were brought into circulation in the late 19th, early 20th century. Uisneach began to erupt out of these very early texts, and people realized that this was a place of great significance. And then, of course, the final point there, the mapping of mythology onto landscape. Well, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of Paul Gosling's work on this. It's something that a lot of archaeologists have been doing of recent times, but it's certainly not something that's new. And again, what the Gaelic League were doing 100 odd years ago was to some extent a slightly more kind of popularized version of that process of mapping mythology onto landscape. I must also pay, in a way, tribute at the beginning to Roseanne Schott's excellent essay in Landscapes of Cult and Kingship on Uisneach, which was in a way the first thing I read. And when I read it, I realized, my goodness, there is something to be written about here. And that was tremendously informative and very inspirational. And then the figures down the bottom, James Waddell, J.P. Mallory, Paul Gosling, and Frederick Armau, who recently brought out a book on Uisneach, have also in different ways shaped my thinking. But I suppose the important point that Schott and others have made is that Uisneach was a place used for ritual and ceremonial use across 5 millennia. And I think that in many ways is why it holds such a continuing fascination at both a kind of academic level and a popular level. But that wasn't always the case, and certainly there have been long periods of silence. So I suppose after I'd kind of figured out that Uisneach was a place of importance, I began to look at early Irish literature. And those are really some of the key texts that really mention Uisneach in a significant way, dating back to the Annals of the Four Masters, translated by John O'Donovan, the work of Whitley Stokes, and actually I might mention at least 3 other works by Whitley Stokes that in different ways recognized Uisneach as a place of great importance. Kuno Meyer, also in his translations, most importantly perhaps his fantastic translation, Mongan's Frenzy. And then perhaps the most important text in terms of recognizing the kind of the importance of Uisneach as this axis around which so much ritual and indeed culture and politics happened. And that's R.I. Best's The Settling of the Manor of Tara. And it was great at the ceremony back in May to actually hear that story being told as the fire was lit. And then, of course, E.J. Gwyn's The Metrical Dincentious, which again demonstrates Uisneach's importance as a place name. So those were some of the texts of early Irish literature, and as you can see, that most of them start to configure with that time period and the late 19th, early 20th century. Now, I suppose the point at which I really began to realize that perhaps there was a lot more to this story than I had imagined was when I managed to get hold of a copy of The Fate of the Children of Uisneach, which was a dual translation published by the Society for the Preservation of the Irish Language in, as you can see there, 1898. And what I began to realize is that that story about the fate of the children of Uisneach, which is better known as Deirdre, or Deirdre of the Sorrows, or Deirdre and the Sons of Uisneach, a story that is part of the great assembly of tales told in the Torn. What I began to realize is that there was clearly a kind of fusion and indeed confusion between the use of Uisneach as as part of the children of Uisneach, as well as the place itself. So in the glossary to that book, The Fate of the Children of Uisneach, it actually has a reference to Uisneach as a hill in Westmeath where the 4 provinces met before the formation of the province of Meath. So what you can see there is that even in the kind of process of translation, there was this kind of subtle, as I say, fusion and confusion of Uisneach, the place, with Uisneach, the three sons who are so much part of the story of Deirdre. And it was actually Frederick Armagh has a series of, a kind of section in his book published in 2023, where he says, you know, the sons of Uisneach were the sons of the centre of Ireland, perhaps at least partially a symbol of the quintessence of the island, her beauty or her symbolic greatness. And only sons of Uisneach, sons of the heart of Ireland, were worthy of the beauty of Deirdre. And so what Armagh does, and what others have done before him, is that they realize that actually the sons of Uisneach have this relationship, if you like, with Uisneach itself, with the place Uisneach, or the hill of Uisneach, that isn't necessarily obvious, but is definitely there. And here is quite an interesting map, actually, by a Scottish academic that essentially traces the geography of Deirdre, which was an important story also to the Scottish revival across Ireland and the west coast of Scotland. And I think, again, what you can see is that the prominence with which that story was circulated, retold, and reimagined in the early 20th century, and it really becomes the story in terms of sort of its performative element within the repertoire of the revival. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. But before I get there, I want to also make the point that I suppose the thesis that I'm making tonight about how critical Uisneach was as a space of both centrality and unity didn't really find itself articulated until much later in the 20th century. And so although those translators of early Irish literature were conscious of the importance of Uisneach, it wasn't really until Celtic scholars began to, in a way, study those texts, but also began to connect what happened in Ireland with much broader sort of constellations of Celtic ideology, that it started to make sense. Now, the critical figure in this is Proinsias MacCarna, you know, really one of the great Irish Celticists of the 20th century. MacCarna had written an essay back in the Crane Bag, a very early edition of the Crane Bag in 1978, and he wrote an essay called Notes on the Early Irish Concept of Unity. It's a very good essay. It's a very interesting essay. It's slightly polemic, but it was an idea that really he never let go of. And when he died, I think in 2004, a more or less finished manuscript was found on his computer, and his family and his closest scholarly friends decided to publish it. And that was all eventually published. And that is the book on the right, The Cult of the Sacred Centre, Essays in Celtic Ideology. And there's a very interesting essay in that collection, which is specifically about Uisneach. And he makes this point, and I think it's worth saying. He says, the constellation of motives which link the notion of sovereignty, the cult of the centre, and the ideological unity of the whole island form a mythic complex that is constantly recycled in whole or in part by passing allusion or extended restatement. And I think what McCann is really hinting at there is just how, in a way, this kind of the kind of significance and the symbolic significance of Uisneach as being at the heart of this mythic complex, as he calls it, is something that is just essentially kind of retrieved and reinvented in every generation. And I think in many ways, the Fire Festival is the kind of current manifestation of that. McCann, though, is interestingly enough, both informing and being informed by two other, I suppose, mythographers and archaeologists. The first one I'm going to talk about is O.G.S. Crawford, the guy on the right, who in the late 50s wrote a book called The Eye Goddess. Crawford is one of those remarkably, well, I mean, all archaeologists, and please don't get me wrong here, are in their own way eccentric, but O.G.S. Crawford was kind of famously eccentric, quite reclusive, and he spent, once he learned how to fly, he spent a great deal of time flying around very remote parts of the planet and looking down at ancient ruins. And in a way, the Eye Goddess was his view that really early civilizations were really kind of, in a way, maybe obsessed is the wrong word, but they were kind of focused on this idea of centrality and unity. And he looked at how the Eye Goddess is essentially a comparative work. He looks at how this kind of notion of unity and centrality can be traced across different civilizations. And then the person who in many ways took hold of that thesis, and again, partly also informed by his reading of McCann, was Michael Dames. And the illustration on the left, or the figure on the left, is essentially Dames's sort of reading of that, of kind of Crawford's idea of this kind of importance of centrality. And as you can see, Dames demonstrated how Uisneach can be aligned with other sacred sites and hilltops across Ireland, and made a very convincing thesis, and one I know that has been pretty influential in structuring how many people think about Uisneach today. And Dames made this very powerful comment, and I suppose this in the end is now where I want to what I want to talk about in terms of, in a way, the kind of performative element of the Irish revival speaks to this notion of divine space-time. So Dames says at one point in Mythic Island on page 17, he says, Mythic Island is centered on the story of a divine space-time cycle in which provinces of time, and I suppose there he means the seasons, continuously interact with provinces of space thanks to a mythic narrative which draws them together as the visible life of the gods. And I mean, it's kind of one of those sentences that every time I read it, I get a kind of different take on it, and it's not in any way specific, but there is something very powerfully kind of honest about it. And I suppose what I want to do now is to try and show you how the Gaelic League were essentially retrieving that divine space-time cycle on their own terms. Okay, so to begin that story, I want to transport you to Harcourt Terrace, which is just off St. Stephen's Green in central Dublin. And there's a house there, if you're ever passing, it's worth having a look. It looks slightly disheveled these days, but it's nevertheless a beautiful sort of Dublin mansion house. And it has that plaque on the wall. In the rear of this house, the world premiere of George Russell's Deirdre took place on the 2nd of January 1901. And there are those 6 photographs together on the left are of that production. Now, one of the discoveries I made in the when I was going through a lot of papers in the Royal Irish Academy earlier this year was that there are essentially 2 versions of those photographs. There's a copy held in the National Library of Ireland, which has very little information on the back beyond the fact that the play was put on in George Coffey's garden in Dublin in order to celebrate their son Diarmaid's 12th birthday, which doesn't tell you a great deal, but the copy in the Royal Irish Academy provides the cast of actors, and you can see there that rather scruffy central panel shows that Deirdre was performed on January the 2nd and 3rd, 1901, and then it has cast, and that is A.E., who's George Russell, who of course painted that picture of Deirdre at the threshold of her dune, which was the title slide at the beginning of the talk this evening. George Coffey, who was owned the house. He was the director of the National Museum at that time. R.I. Best, who I've mentioned, who was a great Irish language scholar. James Cousins, who was from Belfast, and with Margaret Cousins, again becomes one of the critical intellectuals of the revival. And then on the right-hand side, you have Ella Young and Elizabeth Young. Ella Young is the great mystic who ended up living for years in California and wrote a wonderfully eccentric sort of mystical memoir about the Irish Revolution called Flowering Dusk, and her sister, who was an actor. And that was the first performance of Deirdre, okay, A's play. And it kind of begins in this very amateurish way, but actually then quite quickly picks up pace. There's an image on the left of Elizabeth Young in the costume of Deirdre. There in the middle is the playbill announcing the production put on in August 1903, when Yeats was president of the Irish National Theatre Society, which of course becomes the Abbey Theatre. And you can see a pretty impressive list of names: Maud Gonne, Douglas Hyde, W.G. Fay, Frank Ryan. And then that's 1903. And then on the right-hand side, you have a clipping from an American newspaper announcing the production of the play in in Philadelphia in 1910. So what you really have there is the fact that, and these certainly weren't all the productions, that Deirdre really plays this important part. Again, in storytelling, published versions of the story, you also have this very kind of powerful reimagining of Deirdre. There on the left, you have an image of the 3 sons of Uisneach, Naoise, who of course fell in love with Deirdre, with his 2 brothers, supporting Deirdre as they kind of approach, I suppose, land through the waves. In the middle there, you have Deirdre's Lament, a late, I think from 1898, a drawing by J.H. Bacon. And then there on the right, you have a very fine, beautiful image of Naoise and Deirdre from Pamela Coleman Smith's remarkable work, The Green Sheaf. Pamela Coleman Smith is best known for her famous deck of tarot cards. So there you have, and then of course down the bottom left-hand corner, we shouldn't forget W.B. Yeats, J.M. John Millington Synge, Lady Gregory, and James Stephens, all of whom wrote different versions of Deirdre. And Yeats and Synge, of course, wrote plays around Deirdre pretty soon after A.E. had done his. So the story just got this immense level of circulation. and really became a way by which this kind of sense of sort of national, of kind of potential was performed. Okay, the figure I want to introduce you to now is someone who has been remarkably neglected in the last decade more of the analysis of the sort of cultural revolution that predated 1916, and that is Francis Joseph Biggar. Biggar was a really extraordinarily active Belfast-based antiquarian who had his fingers in all numbers of pies across a very long period of time. He's probably most fondly remembered as the president of the Belfast Naturalists Field Club. He played a very key role in the development of the Gaelic League in Belfast, and he resuscitated and edited the Ulster Journal of Archaeology. And from the late 1890s through really to certainly to 1922 and the partition and his early death in 1926, his house, which was called Ardree, the fort of the king, becomes this, in a way, this sort of radical university where sort of cultural nationalists from across Ireland meet to talk and to essentially work out how they can make interventions on a whole number of levels that can build the kind of spiritual capacity of Ireland. And that photograph on the bottom left-hand corner is the famous fireside in Biggar's library, where much of these conversations happened. So Biggar clearly had a deep fascination and reverence for the Hill of Uisneach. How do we know this? We know this because in a relatively brief period of time, a great deal of kind of cultural energy emerged out of his circle. In 1902, he published in the Dublin Penny Journal The Lament of Deirdre. And this is interesting, and I'm going to talk a little more about this in a moment, is because it deals with a very particular part of the Deirdre story, which is her return to Ireland after those years of exile on the west coast of Scotland in Argyllshire. And she makes her landfall on the coast of County Antrim. And Biggar became really interested in the kind of specifics of that site. Also from his fireside emerged a kind of pretty impressive poem by the poet Joseph Campbell, who also was known for his acting. Again, a really powerfully prominent figure in the revival, and then of course he becomes part of the volunteer movement after in the build up to 1916, and then after the treaty, he fights on the anti-treaty side. He wrote a poem, and he also published an essay, a kind of very prosaic essay in the United Irishman, also in 1904. And then there was a short pamphlet produced by Major R.G. Berry, who was a British Army colonel who fought and done much kind of active service in West Africa, and then had retired, I think, relatively early to a big house in the north, and he then really became a kind of low-level antiquarian, but was quite close to Biggar, and he wrote quite an interesting little pamphlet called Notes on the Hill of Uisneach. A very rare little publication, but again, full of quite interesting knowledge. Anyhow, just to move on, in 1904, Biggar seems to have largely paid for the production of a version of Deirdre that was put on in Belfast. This happened in March, I think, 1904. And in the cast were Joseph Campbell and his brother, John Campbell, who was a very well-known illustrator. And that was only put on for a couple of nights, but it definitely created some level of kind of interest, and both nights had a significant audience. So what I kind of want to talk about now is how, in many ways, the kind of the importance of Uisneach becomes critical above all to the Gaelic revival or the cultural revival in Ulster. And this again is largely driven by Biggar and his circle. Okay, and I want to before I kind of return in a way to Ulster, I want to also just give you a little bit of context as to what's happening at a scholastic level in the Irish language movement at that time. In 1903, the great German philologist Kuno Meyer gave a talk in Dublin, in the Mansion House, really advocating for the setting up of a school of Irish learning. And this was going to specifically deal with the translation of early Irish manuscripts into English and indeed into other languages in order in different ways to just open up that scholastic resource. So that was a really critical moment, and the School of Irish Learning essentially emerges from that speech. And there at the top of this slide, you can see the language scholars who were involved in it. R.I. Best there is the Honourable Secretary. Of course, we saw him acting in Deirdre, and of course, Mrs. J.R. Green. And actually, Alice Stopford Green, also known as Mrs. J.R. Green, was really one of the key funders of the early years of the Irish School of Irish Learning. The following year, they launch Eru, which is the journal, which still is going to this day and remains the great kind of repository and resource of Irish language scholarship. And Eru, of course, was the sovereignty goddess whose spirit resides beneath the great Alnamiran stone, which is the kind of center of Ireland, which is the great, I suppose, monument on Uisneach itself. And Alice, again, was pretty instrumental in the setting up of the journal. And then also in 1905, you have the founding of Sinn Féin. Okay, so the big meeting that really kicks off interest in the Hill of Uisneach happens in August 1906, when the Oireachtas, the great gathering of Irish language, Gaelic League enthusiasts in Dublin, leads to a field trip. And they have a day-long excursion to Uisneach in August 1906. And on the hill that day, you had the historian Mary Hayden, Alice Stopford Green, Alice Milligan, again, a poet and language scholar, and Arthur Griffith, who had, a few months before founded Sinn Féin. The speakers in different ways, and I think interestingly, came from each of the 4 provinces of Ireland. Perhaps most significantly, you had P.T. McGinley, also known as the Cúl Ulla, the Hound of Ulster, who, with Daniel Lynch, or a well-known doctor from North Cork, they gave big speeches in Irish, obviously addressing the critical importance of kind of maintaining Irish as a spoken language. And then from a more local level, you had James Toote, the well-known from the well-known family of jewelers. There's in the bottom right-hand corner one of their family clocks, and he had been an Irish Party MP, had also been briefly imprisoned for his involvement in the Land League. And then in 1897, he joined the Society of Antiquaries. And he wrote in the days before the gathering in 1906, a big article on Uisneach, which appeared in the Irish Independent. And then, of course, the other great figure involved was James Woods. I mean, a fantastically sort of mesmerizing figure, an antiquarian, local historian, self-taught, and he was on the point of publishing his great work on County Meath, and a significant extract from the Annals of Westmeath that would be published in 1907 was also published in the run-up to that event. So that was the first big event, the 1906 one. Now, I'm sure Biggar was there, although I can't find any direct evidence that he was. He doesn't appear in any of the lists from the local newspapers. What I did find, though, in the National Library was a postcard that Biggar sent to Eleanor Hull. You can see her name there in Irish. And on the right, on the left, F.J. Biggar, FJB is Francis Joseph Biggar. Biggar has essentially thanked Eleanor Hull for her kind of enthusiasm for something he'd written about Samuel Ferguson. And Eleanor Hull was in many ways the great, scholar of Cuchulainn and the Tawn and that period. And I'm sure there are people in the room who have a far deeper knowledge than I do about the Tawn. But Eleanor Hull was in the process of translating it. She wrote a number of very key essays on the Tawn, and then, of course, produced a very accessible children's version. And that illustration of Cuchulainn there is from that version. Now, what's interesting about this postcard is the picture on the front. And this is it. It's by the quite well-known Belfast artist, J.W. Carey. And if you can read the script at the bottom, it says, "The landing of Deirdre and the sons of Uisneach at Carrig Uisneach, between Benmore and Ballycastle, County Antrim, an episode," and then in brackets, "an episode in the heroic period of Irish history." And here you can see Deirdre with her druids and the sons of Uisneach and the warriors, and that bit Benmore very distinctly in the background. And I suppose so that kind of interested me, because I then came across an essay where Biggar refers to the fact that, oh yes, I should tell you first that is Carrig Uisneach. That is essentially the bit of ground that he's talking to. It's this little sort of rocky crag that juts out into the sea, just east of Ballycastle, okay? And those who know that area, but perhaps have never visited Carrig Uisneach, should do so. And Biggar was really interested because this really connected the story of Deirdre very directly to Ulster and to Antrim, which of course was the part of Ulster. Antrim to the Ulster revival was what the West was to the kind of Gaelic revival in the rest of Ireland. And what interested Biggar was essentially, and what he does is he connects the kind of narrative of that heroic moment of Irish mythology to his own emerging fascination for the Elizabethan Gaelic lords who challenged Elizabethan power at the end of the 16th century. And Biggar built or paid for the construction above Cushendune, again, not far from Carrig Uisneach, the building of this cairn to Shane O'Neill, who of course was one of those lords who had been treacherously murdered by Elizabeth's allies. And between 1907 and 1914, a series of orations were held on that spot. Bigger gave the first one. William Bulfin, who of course was married to Catherine O'Rourke, whose family came from very near the Hill of Uisneach. Shane Leslie, who was a prominent politician of that time. Henry Kenny, Sean Gall, William Gibson, who's best known because his sister tried to assassinate Mussolini. Alice Milligan, who I've referenced already. And then on the 28th of June, 1914, the day the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, that very day, Roger Casement gave the oration from that spot. Now, what is interesting is the connection Bigger makes between that cairn and Carrig Uisneach. In an article he wrote on Shane O'Neill in the Ulster Journal of Archaeology in 1908, which was essentially about the construction of it, he said, a square sandstone slab from Carrig Uisneach has been built into the east face of the cairn with the simple name in Gaelic, Shane O'Neill, okay? And there it is. And you can see very distinctly that it's sandstone and very much the color of the Carrig that we saw a moment ago. If we go back, and you can see that, I think that hole in the middle of the Carrig is where rock has been essentially extracted over the years. But there you have Shane O'Neill's stone in that in that monument on that cairn in Antrim. And Bigger didn't leave the story of Shane O'Neill there. He then in 1911 procured that tower house in Ardglass. And actually, if you look in the top left-hand corner of the big photograph of the with the herring barrels, you'll see that that flag is flying above the tower house in the top left-hand corner of that lantern slide image. And that castle itself sort of extended the kind of that hot housing of nationalism in the years before 1916. Okay, Bigger was also involved in 1910 in the first Uisneach Feis. And this was held in Toggerstown House in just in the kind of foothills or the kind of fields surrounding Uisneach. There is the house. It's actually a very fine farmhouse. It doesn't look so spectacular from the front, but in the back of it, you have some really beautiful yards and a walled garden and some old stables. And actually in the house, there is a stunning ballroom, plastered ballroom, which is perhaps its most important feature. But there you can see that at 2 o'clock on Sunday the 12th, Mr. Francis Joseph Bigger arrived by motor. He was accompanied by members of the Armagh Pipers Band, and floating above the car was the flag of the Ulster Pipers bearing the red hand and salmon. So here you see, and yet there you can see some of the pipers. He was very big into piping. So Bigger very much involved as a patron of that first feis. There again were a photograph in his massive photographic collection of young local girls dressed in smocks with hats adorned with flowers. He was also involved in the 1911 feis, where he returns with Alice Stopford Green. She's accompanied also by Sean McBride, and they have a incredibly well-attended event, not actually on the Hill of Uisneach or near it, but in Athlone. And the reason for that was that they wanted to hold a hurling match, and which was going to be the kind of centerpiece of the feis, and that wouldn't have been really possible with the infrastructure on the Hill of Uisneach. And then in the evening, Bigger was presented with he was thanked above all for the support he'd given to the Athlone Pipers Club, which held an event in his honour. And then if you read Alice Stopford's history, especially Irish nationality, you can see that Uisneach itself was beginning to play a really important part in how she, in a way, conceptualized the sort of early history of Ireland. And I could speak about that more. I put some of it into the article I've written. But here, as you can see, there's a map from an actual 1926 publication. But actually, if you go to any of Alice Stopford Green's Irish histories, Uisneach is always marked on the map. And then perhaps an indication of the importance in terms of the conversation that was being had at a very high level within that kind of scholarly world. You have Owen MacNeill writing to Alice Stopford Green in May 1912, clearly unaware that she had delivered the oration the year before, but saying, you know, Uisneach is worth a pilgrimage. You remember my saying how the Connachta, the race of Conn, after the wars of Torn, crossed the Shannon and established their power in Mid-Ireland. And after that, they seized Tara, then Oriel or Mid-Ulster, and then Western Ulster, and so came to dominate Ireland for 6 or 7 centuries. And when you stand on the hill of Uisneach, you get the topographical sense of all that progression, remote as it is in time. The Shannon is in view, and the plain of Meath is all around you. The hill is a mere swelling rise in the plain, covered with rich grass to the top. I love this last bit, the kind of place where the old kings like to be. But again, the sense that you get from that is that that is a real bit of kind of reconquest of Gaelic Irish space being described there. And it's a very, very powerful kind of sort of viewing of that remarkable vista, panoramic vista from the top of the hill of Uisneach. The last big event in Gaelic League event, really before everything starts to get nasty and political, was well, in 1912 you had the last Feis, which was held on June the 9th, and of course that was very much deliberately configuring with the St. Columkille's Day, which is again a figure that Alice Stopford Green had great affinity with. And then the following year in May, May the 18th, Douglas Hyde and Agnes O'Farrelly visited Mullingar, and as I said, I described that moment in the article that will be coming out in the next edition of the journal. Okay, so I want to end now really by quickly looking at the sort of politicization. I can see I've already gone over my time, or I'm about to go over it. So I'm going to really kind of telescope this down. I suppose the first thing to say is that, you know, look, a lot of those figures who were involved in Uisneach and it's kind of redefining through the Gaelic League were involved in the Howth Kilcool gun running of July 1914. You know, Alice Stopford Green paid for it. Owen MacNeill was, you know, Chief of Staff of the Irish Volunteers. Francis Joseph Biggar was involved in the essentially the kind of recruitment of 2 Irish-speaking sailors to work with Erskine Childers, and Diarmid Kofi, who of course had been the 12-year-old boy who had had the honor of having Deirdre performed on his birthday back in 1901, and had become a pretty active figure within volunteer circles. He was also involved in that moment. So look, I'm not going to go into what happens next. You all know what happens next. But in the immediate aftermath, Alice Milligan, interestingly enough, wrote a poem that was published in New Ireland in 2 successive editions, March the 10th and March the 17th, 1917. And she published this poem called The Ash Tree of Uisneach. And that the first 63 lines are devoted to essentially her her kind of applauding Alice Stopford Green for the work she'd done for the scholastic wing of the Irish revival. And what I'm going to actually read you a few lines from that poem. So the poem begins, and she's here talking about Alice Stopford Green. She says, "Once, statue still, I saw you up on Uisneach hill, while the rain fell on grasses long, stand on the outskirts of a throng, far travelled on that August day, from the four ends of Ireland, they enchanted chorus made resound, that too long silent mustering ground, with the Gaeldom's native speech and song. Good choice was made of gathering place, there nigh the well-poised mearing stone, where came the tribesmen of our race, when all obeyed the Meathen throne." And that carries on. And then, interestingly enough, it then sort of, it kind of diverts into essentially a poem about the trial of Roger Casement. I mean, Green and Casement really formed one of the great relationships in the build-up to 1916. And that poem was then republished, just to go back, that poem was then republished in 1933, again by Alice Milligan. She gives the Irish form of her name. And interestingly enough, she says that she makes a reference to Pearse giving the oration, which of course he didn't. There were a number of orations. Maybe Pearse gave an oration on another occasion, it's not clear. But what is interesting is that she talks there about how in 1917 much of that poem had been censored, and she had then sort of published it in 1933 as she intended. But when you actually go back to the 1917 version, you see that she actually, everything she wrote about Alice Stopford Green has been cut out of the version published in 1933. And I only discovered this the other day, and actually it was in preparation for the talk this evening. So, I mean, that is a very powerful and important bit of cultural history to do with Uisneach, that poem. Okay, so yeah, I mean, what happens next is that essentially Uisneach is militarized. Here in 1919, a few days before the meeting of the First Dáil, you have Michael McCoy, an Irish volunteer, speaking about a meeting held on Uisneach, which was essentially met by RIC officers on horseback, and how you know, it was clearly very tense. Sean T. O'Kelly, Joe McGuinness, and Lawrence Gunnell were among the speakers on the platform. Then after 1922, Uisneach really becomes an anti-treaty space. I'll talk about how, in a way, the Free State itself tries to kind of recapture control in a moment to finish. But in 1923, Helena Maloney visits the Hill in a meeting arranged by Sinn Féin, and makes a pretty powerful speech demanding the release of political prisoners. And then in 1927, there's that famous photograph, which I'm sure a good few of you are aware of De Valera making a speech standing beside Patrick McKenna. So there you can see very much it's being used for those purposes. What the state does itself is kind of interesting too. You know, I suppose the real tragedy in the whole story of Uisneach is that when partition happens, the very reason it's been to some extent invoked by the Gaelic League, and especially the Ulster branch of the Gaelic League, to promote a sense of sort of centralization and unity, is of course rendered and destroyed by partition. There's also a kind of very cruel irony, is that Owen McNeill, who had of course given a very rousing speech in 1910 at the first Feis, is one of the boundary commissioners. Francis Joseph Biggar is completely spiritually killed, quite simply, by partition. He never recovers. After 1922, he refuses to even travel again over the border, and he dies relatively young, in his early 60s, in 1926. Alice soldiers on, and in 1925 she publishes The History of the Irish State to 1014, and chapter 2 of that is really on Uisneach and Tara, where she in a way develops R.I. Best's kind of analysis of the settling of the manor of Tara, and looking at how that axis that joined Uisneach to Tara became a kind of central political dynamic in the structuring of Ireland before 1014. It's quite a kind of wacky thesis, and Alice Stopford Green was a very sort of unorthodox, I should say, historian, but I think really also can be read as pretty fascinating if you're able to transcend the level of prejudice that still surrounds these figures. And then finally, and this really is where I'm ending, you have the Royal Irish Academy trying to take control through Robert Lloyd Prager and the great archaeologist who, of course, had worked for a decade in Palestine, R.A.S. McAllister, before he came back to take up a professorship at UCD. And here on the right, you have minutes from the exploration committee of the Royal Irish Academy. And you can see that the top minute, Wednesday, the 23rd of February, 1913, trying to read it here, it says the country has unfortunately been impossible to undertake any exploration work during the past year. All the plans are ready, however, for an important research which will be undertaken once order is restored. And then the following year, in July 24, the only two people present at the meeting are McAllister and Prager, and the minute there says decided to proceed with preliminary arrangements for examination of Boyne, Tumuli, and Uisneach Cemetery. And then below that, July the 1st, 1925, it says the recent preliminary excavations at Uisneach was discussed. So that's the field excavations had begun. And McAllister and Prager produced in 1928 that pretty remarkable report, really the perhaps the most significant publication on Uisneach until the recent work by Armagh came out. And it gives a very kind of fascinating kind of taxonomy of what was found, and not very much. And I think for me, the most important sentence from the whole report is when they say this. And it's a question they ask, and is it not reasonable to suppose that the extensive bed of ashes which we found at the southern side of the hill are the tangible traces of this great sacred flame which made so deep an impression on folk memory? And what they're kind of speaking back to in that in the asking of that question are essentially the significant number of references in those early Irish manuscripts that refer to Uisneach as this sort of site of origin, where the first sacred flames of Ireland were lit, that essentially gave birth, if you like, to the country itself. And so I think what that report is trying to do is to some extent to sort of bring some level of closure to that great fascination for Uisneach, which had in many ways thrived until, of course, it was brought down and silenced by the partitioning of Ireland. And I think, again, you can see this, and this is my last text slide, from Robert Lloyd Prager's 1937 study of the way that I went, his beautiful natural history of Ireland, which is one of the great natural histories of all time, Ireland apart. But he talks about, the hill of Uisneach. Uisneach rises gently to 250 feet above the surrounding undulating country, itself attaining some 600 feet above sea level. It has a rather extensive flattish top, which was a place of importance in old days, as witnessed by the number of monuments, mostly of the nature of ring forts and tumuli, which are scattered over it. According to ancient sources, it was the site of a royal palace and a royal cemetery in prehistoric times, and a leading place of assembly. Later in early Christian days, it was the seat of the kings of Connacht. One point is worthy of note: though of but small elevation, the hill of Uisneach, standing in the middle of the central plain, commands a singularly extensive view, and from its summit, on a clear day, features belonging to no less than 20 out of the 32 Irish counties can be identified, and a beacon fire lit here might be seen over 1/4 of Ireland. Yeah, I mean, a beautiful kind of straightforward description of Uisneach. What's amazing about it for me, though, is what he just doesn't put in there. I mean, Prager had as much contact with what was happening at a scholarly level and indeed at a Gaelic League level around Uisneach in the previous 30 years, but no mention of it whatsoever. I mean, this is really how the state is trying to deal with, at that time, with those kind of places which no longer fitted in with what had happened after the passing of the Government of Ireland Act. And there you have that beautiful image of Uisneach, which is put into kind of contemporary, a contemporary take on it, but I think a very powerful rendering of it. And of course, here you have the fire festival, the crowd gathered around that sacred flame. And what I love about this photo is how it looks like an eye, and it takes you back to that whole notion of Uisneach as the kind of the eye goddess. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Thanks very much, Angus. Really enjoyed it. And I think you finished up there very well, talking about the remains of the ashes that were discovered by Prager, and linking that, how they were fanned back into life by a roll call of everybody involved in the Gaelic revival and the discovery of nationhood at this particular time. So it's a marvelous lecture, very comprehensive, and really, in a sense, there as well, what struck me about was the important place that Francis Biggar played in this. Just wondering, was he related to Biggar, the politician, in Home Rule movement?
Yeah, he was. But I think he quite distanced himself from it. And in fact, he changed the spelling of his name in order not to be confused with him. Although people still do confuse him. Yeah. So that spelling, and even in some of the press articles you see, he was referred to as Biggar, and he actually changed his name to Biggar with an E.
Yeah. And the connection up there to the promontory of the Ballycastle coast, Carrigishnach, and taking the stone there, the sandstone from there to the cairn he built for Shane O'Neill, was extraordinary.
Interesting, isn't it?
Very interesting as well as amazing. So we opened up the questions there. If anybody wants to ask Angus a question, now you put on your audio. Mute yourself again, please. If any questions, we have marvelous images, Angus. They were really superb and visually extremely attractive. Any questions, clarifications? Can everybody hear us there? What do you think, Pauline?
I'll ask a question. First of all, that was a wonderful talk on so many levels, so much in it. And I just wondered, because of the idea of the Gaelic League and the revival and all of that, and what you said at the end, the way the state kind of tried to suppress that afterwards, was that like a big flash in the middle of that era? Had it been very much dormant in people's awareness and interest before that time? And did it very much die down again afterwards until recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think really it emerges back into view because of the translation of the early Irish literature. And then because it is clearly a place of such prominence, people start to think about it. And then I think that's happening at a scholastic level initially between the likes of Meyer and Kuna Meyer and Whitley Stokes, and then I think the narrative of Deirdre and the Sons of Uisneach then also starts to kind of, in a way, play with it in terms of this kind of, as I said, that kind of divine space-time relationship. And I think that what then they realize is, or what a number of people realize then, is that it can be a story that really can be retold and reimagined in ways that can help build that kind of, in a way, spiritual capacity that was such a part of the national project at that time. And one always should remember that, the Tone is essentially an Ulster myth, and the fact that it essentially is perhaps the central myth within that period, and that the story of, I mean, obviously apart from the figure of Cuchulainn, but the story of Deirdre and the Storrows or the Deirdre and the Sons of Uisneach is certainly the dimension of that narrative that is most prominently told and retold. But then I think, a lot happens after 1922 that makes it kind of inconvenient to really talk about Uisneach much. And I've looked through some of the, I mean, as much as I can. I mean, again, there's a limit to just how much kind of access I have to some of the papers, and I suppose I need to, in a way, look at in greater detail at some of the big kind of intellectuals of the mid 20th century. But certainly, it seems to me that it's not really until Pontius Macarna comes along that Uisneach really then starts to kind of come into focus again, and he clearly does have an influence on Michael Dames, and then I think, the archaeological side of it. I mean, I don't know how Roseanne Schott and the archaeologists have engaged. I would be very, very interested to know, but I think she was really the first one to really start paying attention again. So yeah, I mean, there was a long period where nothing really very much happened.
And before that as well, before the period you talked about, the same thing, obviously.
Yeah, I think so. It's really O'Donovan and the Annals of Ulster that it starts to come back. But I haven't really looked back. I mean, certainly within the antiquarian world, there was always a fascination with the kind of the culture of Druidry, and so there might well be some 18th century material. I mean, certainly we know Samuel Ferguson went to the Hill of Uisneach, and there's he published a paper in the proceedings of the Academy. I can't remember which part of the proceedings on Uisneach, but not in any major way. But there's not a lot going on.
And there was huge involvement there, Angus, by women. You mentioned Stopford Green, of course, the whole story around Deirdre, and Roseanne Schott as well. So there's a great mix of people and genders involved in it throughout this time here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the gender thing is interesting because
Maud Gonne, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Elizabeth Young, you have Ellie Young, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose no, you do, and I suspect again that a lot of those figures would have, in different moments, perhaps not 1906 or 1910, paid a visit to Uisneach. I mean, I think there's the potential to find far more references to it. I think the most significant one is, in a way, William Bulfin's Rambles in Erin, that book he publishes in 1907, but largely based upon the articles he's published in the United Irishman. he, I think, is also part of that kind of intention to reconfigure Uisneach as a kind of axis point within Ireland, and you get that sense from his book. I mean, there are a few references both at the beginning and the end, and he obviously, as I said, had interest in that region because of his marriage, and
it probably extended out to Argentina then, in a sense, as well, because he was resident there for a long time, wasn't he? He wrote in the Southern
yeah.
Star.
He was the editor of the Southern Cross, which was the great newspaper, and then of course his son fought in the GPO in 1916, and I think his daughter married Sean McBride.
My God.
I think I'm right on that.
Mm.
Yeah.
His wife was by Vockley near the Hill of Uisneach. He described that area there as a turf belt when he came back cycling around.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they all inquired about relations down there.
But no, I mean, I think the Armagh book is really interesting, but I do think there is there's a lot more to know about Uisneach in that period for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and you have two local antiquarians, historians there. You have James Chute, who was a major figure here, as well as James Woods. So the fact that they were there, and as well as that, very interesting, I think it was oral account of the volunteers there by Michael Mackay. His sons are still here in Mullingar.
Oh, are they?
One of them, yeah. I taught with his son Michael Mackay, and there was Sean Mackay. There was teachers and priests and so forth in the family. But they were a very well-known family here in town, are indeed, you know. So you have that. You had a quote there of the volunteers who marched up there. The president, he's the same person.
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually, and that's not the only reference, I think, to that incident or to that gathering on the Hill of Uisneach in 1919. And I suppose, again, what interests me, it seems to me that Sean T. Kelly, who of course became president of Ireland, but in that that evening put on for Francis Joseph Biggar in Athlone in 1911, the night of the Fesh. It seems to me that Sean T. O'Kelly was the kind of the master of ceremonies that evening, and well, there is but it doesn't put the T in his name, but it's someone who was obviously senior within the Gaelic League and was was kind of well known in that area. And then he makes that speech just before on the Hill of Uisneach in 1919. It's very interesting. And Lawrence Ginnell too, you know, obviously just so incredibly active. But he was a British member of Parliament at that time. But he, I mean, Ginnell is a towering, fascinating figure. And again, you can see I've got at least two other references to him being involved in events on the Hill of Uisneach. And again, I mean, it certainly didn't cover all of the events. And the article I've written for you, Seamus, is in different ways speaks to a lot of those sort of slightly lesser meetings that we haven't really had time to discuss this evening. Yeah,
and Angus has written a marvellous article, which will appear in our 4th edition of Year V, will be launched next November, this coming November, with about 25 articles in it, just to give that, flag that publication. And many of the illustrations that he's presented here this evening will be the fabulous illustration he has there is the young girls, young ladies, I presume from the area, who are dressed up in the smocks and hats and so forth that you got from the bigger collection, which you would say is a huge photographic collection. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, Biggar is really interesting in that regard. He took photographs himself, but he also hired very well-known Belfast photographers, Alexander Hogg being one of them, and Robert Welsh being another one of them. And they often accompanied him on field trips with the Belfast Naturalist Field Club, on archaeological trips. And I've managed, the problem is that there's still a kind of anxiety around Biggar in Belfast, and there are about 5,000 photographs and photographic plates of his that are still kept in the Belfast Museum, in an archive there, which I managed to access earlier this year, and I found a few kind of, I suppose, sort of social reportage photos that Biggar had taken, that being one of them, and perhaps the most kind of in a way insightful. But yeah, I mean, I think there will be a lot more images in the Biggar collection that would be relevant to Meath.
Yeah, that's great. Any other questions there now as we draw to a close?
I haven't been aware that anyone else apart from you and Pauline, Seamus, have been listening in to me. So because I can't see anybody.
Yeah, we can't see. We gave you the full.
Did anyone turn up?
Oh yeah, we had 25.
Oh, right.
Now people have gone to look at the news now at this stage. We still have 15 people listening. Anybody here want to come in? Is Rob there? Rob Delaney, you know?
Yes.
Are you still there, Rob? No?
Oh, look, there's a chat question.
You hear me there? Yeah,
Yeah, you there, Rob? Are you?
Yeah, how are you going?
Rob has done several articles for us here on ERV as well, and did marvelous research himself on was it the 16 pounder? Was it? I get the right.
18, yeah.
18, but 18 pounder that destroyed, was used and destroyed all our records in forecourts.
The culprit.
So he's been part of the reclamation of that. That's a bit of renewal there for you, Rob. What do you think, Rob?
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Yeah, no, thanks very much.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah, no, and as well, just noting there, Angus, you know, there's been a kind of a revisit to it and a rediscovery of it locally again. There's an interpretive centre and regular visits to it, and it's now, you know, there's a campaign to have it as UNESCO Heritage Centre, so that's ongoing as well. And indeed, one of the publications recently in the county was under the hill of Uisneach, so it was it's still very much in the news here.
And what was that publication? Sorry,
under the hill of Uisneach. It was done a number of years ago. A collection.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So it's very much there, and we want to thank Angus for all his research on it. He's done a huge amount of work, and it's really significant here for the county. A lot of it will be gathered together. You've seen his article maybe in History Ireland, and he's very generously contributed to our, as a forthcoming publication. I know he gave a lecture over to WHAHS, the society over in Navan, recently as well, and a similar one. He met a friend of mine there who owns a farm on the hill opposite, which has a lot of history, archaeology, and very much linked to the famine. So he was talking to him there, and he asked Angus, what would he do on the village? The remnants of the village was there, and I thought he gave him a very wise answer: nothing. So I think that was a sense of it. So he appreciated that and quoted that to me. We thank you very much for bringing us on this tour tonight. Most comprehensive, marvelous images, and we wish you a speedy recovery so that you can climb those hills and mountains indeed again. And we will have you down when you're in full health again, please God. Thank you very much, Angus.
Seamus, thank you very much, and thank you all for
and just before you go, can I flag our next event? We're holding a seminar, a free seminar on map making. We had a number of maps there tonight, but this is using the laptop for maps, and it's on the 12th of October. It's free. There's a limited number of places in it. It'll be in the county buildings, the conference centre, at the bottom of Mount Street in Mullingar. And that's just it. I'll give you my contact details at the end of our little talk here. And our next actual on-site lecture will be the 23rd of October. You can put that into your diary. Claire Tuffy, and Claire has worked for years in Newgrange, and she's going to give a very interesting talk on the Boyne Valley tombs. So that's the 23rd, but the approximate and immediate one will have about 15 people at it. You bring your own laptop, and it's a huge opportunity to acquire some skills to make your own maps. And that'll be it was mentioned tonight by Angus, Paul Gosling, who's done a huge amount of work on the town and on mythic landscapes. That's on the 12th of October. And if you want to be part of that, I'll give you my email, O'Briens, OBRIAINS @gmail.com. If you have a pen there handy, my number is 087 265 8138 if you want to contact me to be part of that. Thank you very much, Angus. Appreciate it.
Not at all. Thank you, Seamus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night, everyone.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Angus, thank you, Angus. That was
Thanks,
great.
Pauline. Thanks very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. So perhaps your brother can wind us off the system.